Hey, deserving listeners. This is the Psychology in Seattle YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I train seahorse jockeys.
So let's start where we left off. So in the last episode, we went into detail about demon mode and invisible loyalties and the sexual harassment details and how that might have been a pivotal moment for him in 2022 when it was publicized by Business Insider. That was when he went hard Republican, allegedly or speculatively, because he was trying to get out ahead of the allegations, not because he was particularly wanting to be Republican, but because he was trying to protect himself from the allegations. And he suspected, this is pure speculation, but he suspected that the right would accept him and protect him. Hard to know, but we reviewed all those details in the last episode. So that ends the section on the abuse from the father. And now I want to go into the second category of his trauma that he's talked about, which is how he was bullied. So apparently he grew up in a violent neighborhood and there was a lot of violence going on around him. And so let's listen to him talking about that.
Oh, yeah. Have you ever punched anyone or?
So this video is on the YouTube channel Not the Bee, and it appears to be pulling video from Babylon Bee, whoever that is.
That is a right-wing comedy quote website.
Oh, yeah. Have you ever punched anyone or have you ever been punched? You got any cool punching stories?
I don't know about cool punching stories, but South Africa, when I was growing up, was just an inherently very violent place. I got punched in the face many times. I almost got beaten to death once, many times. And I think if you have not been punched in the face with a fist, you have no idea what it's like.
Thoughts?
Yeah, this reminds me of when we watched the one about the puffing on Joe Rogan. Not the actual puffing on Joe Rogan, but when he was being interviewed by the bros. This is the most genuine version of Musk that I encounter when he's acting this way. Because you would expect if he's still playing the character, doing the mythology, he'd either make something up or be like, oh yeah, I got him fight, whatever. Instead, he immediately deglamorizes the topic. He looks completely serious, hurt. You can tell, you can see the hurt. And he's like, no, certainly nothing cool. It was a very violent place where I live.
Right, because the guys are asking in a joking way, and then they're looking for a story of like, oh yeah, there was this one time I got punched and it was really funny or whatever, and I punched him back, and then I crushed him in business or whatever. But he is responding in a very serious manner, and they're still joking and laughing about it.
Everyone wants to continue mythologizing the whole thing around Elon Musk, right? So with the pot, it was, you were just such a badass, and he's like, no, I barely even touched it, and I can't smoke pot. That will ruin it. And here it's like, nothing cool, no, and it was terrible, and I nearly died, and I got punched in the face a lot of times, right? Which is the opposite. It doesn't, and I'm going to say this, obviously you know what I mean. It doesn't come off like he's a cool badass. It's the opposite. It's like he got beat up. He wasn't the one beating people up, and there's nothing glamorous about it.
Yeah, and he's expressing vulnerability.
Totally.
Like, my heart breaks because when he is saying that, I don't know what happens after that. That was just a clip, but I would want to give him empathy in that moment.
That's where, like, when I see this, and when I see the one where he was talking about pot, and when I see interviews like this, that's the Musk we deserve, and the Musk that would get empathy and would get support, right? And imagine if that somehow translated to all his decisions, right? That honesty, that like self-awareness, because there's a lot of self-awareness of like, anyways, I think it's very interesting. Yeah.
So before moving forward, I want to provide a trigger warning. We're going to go into detail about violence, and there's an interview where we're going to talk about blood and murder, and it's not super detailed and gory, but it's more detailed and gory than we typically talk about on this podcast. So take care and maybe not listen or skip forward or something. Let's watch another clip. This is a video from the Graham Bessinger YouTube channel, and it's an interview with Elon's brother, Kimbal, talking about the violence in his community.
There are really two white tribes, there's Afrikaans and English, and they hate each other more than the black on white situation. The history of the fighting between the Dutch and the English, it makes most wars look tame. And then the black tribes all hated each other for their hundreds of thousands of years of history.
As with the previous video where, the guys are laughing because they likely have no idea just how bad it was for Elon and his brother and in that community, because they've just never even heard stories of that degree, right? And when you hear him talking, he'll give more details here. For myself, as a therapist and as someone that likes to absorb stories, I feel like I have a better understanding, but I'll never really know what it was like because I've never experienced it before.
Right.
And I grew up in one of the nicest, it wasn't a rich community, it was, lower middle or middle class, but there was none of this kind of stuff. There was no violence or no noticeable kind of crime of any sort. And I don't know what that's like, but you do.
Yeah, I've ran into this all the time in my life.
Well, I don't know if this is what you're going to talk about, but I'm curious if when you talk to regular Americans like me, you get this sense like you don't even have any idea. Like you hear my words that it was horrible, but they'll respond to you in a way like, oh yeah, like it was kind of tough and you're like, you really don't get it.
Right, exactly. And it took me a long time to even realize that, because so when I moved here at 15 in high school, it was like, oh, you're Colombian. Is your uncle Pablo Escobar? Oh, it's crazy, right?
Right.
And my natural reaction was like, yeah, dude, it is crazy. Yes, my uncle is Pablo Escobar. All these things. And as I went on, that would actually people would always still do that stuff, right? And then when I started talking for whatever reason with different people about what things happened, there would be conversations similar to in the previous the thing we were seeing, where it was like, oh, that must have been crazy, And I would talk about it. I'm like, yeah, dude, it was crazy. But it didn't occur to me for many, many years. I would say probably like more like in the last decade, maybe I've started to be aware of like, oh yeah, people don't have the same context because thinks and behaves the same way or has the same inputs, but they don't.
Right.
So,
they might have learned it and they might have heard the stories, which isn't likely anyway. But even if they had, they might be able to demonstrate that they understand what happened, in quotes, but they don't really understand. They think they understand, but they don't really understand.
And it goes both ways. I myself didn't understand that I didn't understand the damage that I suffered mentally from living in that environment.
Yeah.
Like if you had asked me even 10 years ago or whatever, I would have said, yeah, but it didn't. Yeah, it was crazy, but it didn't affect me that much. I would have been unself-aware of that. And therefore, if someone was reacting, joking about it or whatever, I probably would have been like, yeah, dude, it's crazy. Only now do I realize, oh, wow, they have no frame of reference.
Yeah, let's watch more.
Yeah.
You're in fear all the time, mostly of white people, not of black people. We would go to these anti-apartheid rallies, and there were a lot of train car massacres where there was black on black violence, where they would just get on the train and just start killing people with machine guns. And that was just kind of part of the day. I remember getting to this concert and the train doors open. There's two black guys, and there's one black guy, I just caught the end of the fight, takes a knife and stabs it into the side of this guy's head, like right there. And this guy just drops dead. Boom. You're like, oh, shit. And it's just the pool of blood just starts pooling all over the ground.
By the way, I like how they bleep the word shit,
yeah,
but allow this gory description of violence. Like, what kind of fucked up society do we live in? That?
Because if you hear the word shit unbleeped, think about what that does to your mind.
Anyway, let's watch more.
And you're just, as a kid, I'm 16 years old, and you're just like, oh. So I just take a step in the pool of blood, because you can't avoid it. And I remember for like about 100 paces, just the stickiness of one foot, like one sneaker, just, and I just like, you just move on. You can't allow yourself to process what just happened. One thing I'll never forget is that stickiness of the blood on my sneaker. I'll never forget that.
So this is just one story of many.
Yeah.
And of course, you're hearing stories from other people, and you don't have to be there to be traumatized. And you're reading things in the paper. Your dad's talking about things. I understand that I don't understand. I understand that's beyond my understanding. So we need to consider that reality as the backdrop for the development of Elon Musk's personality. It's a factor.
Because like I listened to that and I'm like, well, I didn't have to deal with that. Like there's levels to these things. And you can imagine it gets so horrible when you think of the kids that grow up, like the Uganda situations and all that, where kids, 8-year-olds with machetes and machine guns killing each other and butchering each other. And it gets so bad. And you no matter what your frame of reference, there are things you haven't experienced, right? So yeah, hearing that, and obviously, they survived, and so they weren't even in the worst of it, right? And yet, I can't, think about that. You see someone murder someone, you step through their blood, and that's just like a thing that happened to you when you were 16.
Right. And it's not anomalous. It's not unusual. It's not unexpected. It's maybe a particular moment, but it's like, well, yeah, I mean, this stuff is happening all the time. And there's no crisis therapy sessions.
Yeah.
There's no debriefing. You're just moving on with life.
Actually, okay, so that's such an important point. I've mentioned before how, in fact, in one of the previous episodes of this deep dive, how, a politician was assassinated essentially on my street. He was being chased from downtown in his car by, at the time, the thing that was very, very popular were two riders on a motorcycle. The driver and then the guy in the back would have an Uzi, and he would gun down the assassination target. That was what was happening. And they cut in through down my street, and many of the bullets went through, not one, many of the bullets went through our downstairs windows in our living room downstairs. And then they turned right and killed him just like a block down the street. And that's when eventually they fled because there was a cop station near. Anyways.
And this was that house that you took me to.
Yes,
on
that was no longer a residential house. Yeah.
Right.
That happened. And not only, certainly did I go to therapy, we barely discussed all that as a family.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly we were like, oh my God, I can't. But we moved on.
Yeah.
And it just, what was left in my memory was that it happened.
Right. It has a double traumatizing effect. And this is true when it comes to more classic traumas like being physically or sexually assaulted, that you have the trauma of the event, but then you have the trauma of the follow-up or the lack of the follow-up. The message is that it's not a big deal, and the feelings that you're going through are strange or weak, or there's nothing to do with them. There's no resolution to it. And that can sometimes be more traumatizing, have more negative effects than the event itself. Conversely, if you go through an event like that, it's horrible, but if there's proper follow-up, and it might not be right away, maybe it's just over time, then someone can actually resolve to the point where there's no negative effects of the original trauma, Yeah. All right, so the key takeaway from hearing this, and of course, there's a lot more details to this and a lot more descriptions, but the key takeaway is you're a child, okay? Yeah. Even adults, but this is Elon Musk as a child and as a teenager. He is capital U unsafe. He is just unsafe, constant threat, terror. It's just normalized. There's nothing to do about it, right? And violence is coming from every direction. Eventually, people would break into the father's house. I think Elon had moved to the United States by this point, and the father, we talked about this, killed 3 of the invaders. It's unclear if he needed to kill those 3 people, but it just gives you the idea of how violent and how constant this was. And it's just interesting to hear him describe how the real threat was the other white people that considered themselves to be of I don't know if they were with the English faction or the Dutch faction, but anyway, it's just interesting to hear. But let's take a break. When we get back, let's talk about his experiences in school, of which there's a lot to get into. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. So let's talk about the violence that happened at school and the bullying that happened. And this is all leading up to tying his Twitter behavior and the Thailand cave kids incident behavior to not only the bullying that he experienced and the traumas and how those things might be very connected, but also his behavior on Twitter and everything, but also the traumas from his father. Not to excuse it, but to conceptualize it. So Elon has talked about his experience in boarding school. Sometimes it's described as like wilderness school, but he went to boarding school, And he described it as a paramilitary Lord of Flies, where, quote unquote, bullying was a virtue. And also, he was smaller compared to other kids. Eventually, he would catch up to them in terms of size, but he says that he was a very diminutive kid compared to his peers. Also, he's socially awkward, doesn't have any friends to back him up, so he was prime target for the bullies. And if people are already attacking each other, they were really going after him, apparently. He says that children were encouraged to fight over rations, and he frequently had his food taken away from him by the bullies, and he lost 10 pounds. So he's already a small kid, and he's a kid. 10 pounds might have been 12% of his body weight at that point.
It's a lot.
Yeah. I tend to believe him when he says this, and it just makes me wonder why this would be. Either it's just a lack of oversight, or the school, I wouldn't be surprised, particularly given how rough the community was, that they're trying to, quote unquote, make the kids tough, right?
Look, I think that boarding schools are, maybe other than the Catholic Church, some of the most historically damaging institutions to the welfare and psychology of, millions of people. There's been stories and documentaries about these kinds of things. Vicious abuse at the hands of the faculty and the older students in boarding schools in England and all these things. I didn't go to a boarding school. And by the way, the other thing to remind ourselves of is by definition, a boarding school means you don't have your parents.
Right.
But that was, the norm. I didn't go to boarding school, but I did go to a strict Catholic school, which is the norm and things like that. There was still physical punishment in the early grades. As I went through the grades, it seems like they were starting to phase it out, but there was definitely physical punishment when I was in the younger grades. Nuns and teachers would absolutely hit your hands with rulers. You would be forced to endure pain in various ways, like in front of the whole school. You would have to do not sit-ups with the legs, when you squats till you pass out, basically, stuff like that, like really abusive things. But anyways, that was just kind of the norm. And there was a lot of bullying that I witnessed, and I was lucky it didn't hit my shores directly. There were a couple bullies in my class that did verbal bullying with me and some of my friends. But I witnessed a guy 2 grades above constantly viciously bully one of the guys in our grade. And he was one of the bigger guys in our grade, but this guy was 2 grades higher. And at that age, that's everything. Yeah. And plus he had a posse. And there was this thing where you had to walk back to class and you'd have to walk through their little posse, and they would just start kicking. Oftentimes this kid, sometimes other kids and stuff like that. It was vicious. Yeah. And that's nothing compared to some of the stories that people go through.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. I don't think I knew that detail about your childhood.
And again, I got lucky. I don't know why. I just got lucky that the things that I endured were totally minimal compared to even that kid's experience.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine that your social ability helped you to avoid being identified as a easy victim for bullying. So it was luck, and sometimes it is just literally luck. But there's that. And also, you mentioned that the parents aren't around. I won't go into detail, but attachment theory, a theory that I adhere to quite heavily, severely, intensely, was first put forward by John Bowlby, and he went to a boarding school. And likely had attachment injuries and effects in adulthood that he researched. Also, I've had clients who went to boarding school and had good experiences, and yet because of the attachment disruption, they had effects later on. So, you're not going to get an argument from me about boarding schools. It's often elite and people that are rich, and there's obviously a lot of problems among elite and rich people and wealthy people, like what we see with Elon Musk. It just makes you wonder. So moving forward, I'm going to read from Ashley Vance's biography. I'm going to read verbatim from her book, and this is the preamble to a major beating that Elon Musk experienced. He was regularly beat and bullied, but there was one event that put him in the hospital, and this is the preamble to it. This is Elon talking. I was basically hiding from this gang that was fucking hunting me down for God knows fucking why. I think I accidentally bumped this guy at assembly that morning, and he'd taken some huge offense to that. The boy, so then Ashley Vance describes what the story was described to her. The boy crept up behind Musk, kicking him in the head, and then shoved him down the stairs. Musk tumbled down the entire flight, and a handful of boys pounced on him, some of them kicking Musk in the side and the ringleader bashing his head against the ground. Musk said, "I blacked out." So there's more details to this, but his brother was there and can recount it. Let's listen. This is again from Graham Bessinger podcast. I think it's a podcast or a YouTube channel called In Depth with Graham.
What about that makes it such a painful memory for you even today?
Yeah, that was so brutal. So back to the white on white violence. So this was white people attacking white people. I was sitting next to Elon, and these guys come up to him, 4 or 5 guys, and they just start beating him senseless with their fists. There's nothing I can do to help. I just have to sit and watch this. And they had the intention to beat him to death. My brother's face was unrecognizable.
Before moving on, what are your thoughts on that, Berto?
I'm sick. When I was in New York, I was 5. There was a kid that was 2 grades above me. I don't remember why he knew me, why he didn't like me. I have no idea. But I definitely remember one day when he pushed me down the stairs. But I never endured a gang trying to beat me to death like this.
Yeah.
And I cannot imagine either seeing it.
Yeah, you
or
imagine Kimbal as his brother was absolutely traumatized. Yeah.
Oh my God.
And then you think because today you'll see videos of fights happening in the hallway at schools. Teachers are usually coming to the rescue pretty quickly, or their kids. So where were they? But
yeah.
I don't want to accuse anyone of anything. But what it I think points to is just a normalcy or lack of protocol, or kids are kids, let them. Yeah.
But now it still
very
affects
hard,
you. Why?
I mean, I love my brother. I think that one stays with me because you feel it's a feeling of total powerlessness while someone you love is just literally being beaten to death, and you're just powerless. It's still one of the hardest things I've ever experienced.
So, not in the same category, but similar, that the interviewer, the way he asked the question, I'm sure the interviewer's not a jerk face, at least I don't think so, but the way he asked the question, he's like, "Oh, it seems like this is still with you. Why?"
Yeah.
There's another way to answer, or there's another way to ask that question. Yeah.
That's such a good point. It's monstrous in a way. It's like, so I escaped this concentration camp. I saw my entire family killed. Seems like that's still with you. How curious.
Yeah, why? Justify that to me. This is why there's a rule, so to speak, that some trainers of therapists will say that you're never supposed to ask why. It's a ridiculous rule because sometimes the question why is actually a really great question. But what they are trying to avoid is things like this, where it pushes someone to feel like they need to justify why they're feeling. And it gives a message of like, your emotions are weird. But anyway, it just makes me wonder for Elon and I guess Kimbal, if the sort of circles that they run in, journalistic wise and podcast wise, if everyone just is missing the whole emotional point of these stories, because everyone that they've been interviewed by, or largely, it's like they seem to be on another planet, right? It's just like they're like right after this guy basically asks a question essentially like, so did this help Elon in business? It's like, no, I'm not even joking.
Oh my God,
because that's what they're focused on.
Yeah, you would think you'd want to spend 90% after hearing something like this on the emotional aspects. Not.
Well, I mean, if your whole point is to get at that question as to how did the past make the Elon of today, okay, but you could take a beat and say like, wow, that's severe. I'm so sorry that happened. So do you think, or something, like it just seems to be going over their head. Right. Is the thing.
Like you said, take a beat, acknowledge, spend the time, the emotional time.
Yeah.
And then maybe instead of like, did that, and I don't know what the question is, but at the very least, like, how do you think that impacts him today? or something along those lines.
And you just imagine that in their circle, they have, the other venture capitalists and other execs are probably similar because they're so oriented towards profit and wealth and signaling to others that they know more than other people. And I've met people like this. Seattle has a lot of dudes like this. Yeah. Some of them are kind of close to me, and not super close, but close enough that I've had a lot of contact with them. And, I head into the social situations with them, not in this headspace. I just sort of head in just normally. But there's often a point where I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. This guy is one of those guys.
Yeah.
And I can't have a normal conversation, because I'll get to this point where I feel like I'm starting to feel like I need to compete somehow in the wealth game, or I have to signal somehow, or anyway, point is that it's a mindset and it's so all encompassing. It's not just a mode that these guys go into. It's constant. It's like an obsession. It's what them and the people in their circle do. It's along these lines where someone could be talking about something that's obviously traumatic and difficult and emotional, and it doesn't take a genius or a therapist to just say, wow, that's but they're so one-minded about wealth and success and business and profits that it's like they don't have any brain space for anything else. It's pretty depressing.
I'm
honestly.
thinking of in X-Men, the Magneto's story, where in fact he was in a concentration camp beside his family. But you can see the interviewer being like, wow, so that's how you came with the cool magnetic powers? And what's that like?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Because wasn't he tortured or something in the...
Yeah.
So Elon was taken to the hospital, and his father also said that he could barely recognize Elon at the hospital given how beaten he was. After leaving the hospital, Elon said his father berated him for hours. This is a quote from...
What?
Yeah. This is a quote from Elon.
Because when you were saying that his father also said how he was barely recognizable, I was thinking at least maybe
This is how unrelenting the abuse from the father was. Elon says, quote, I had to stand for an hour as he yelled at me and called me an idiot and told me that I was just worthless. Okay, but just wait, Berto. So Elon says this. It's reported on. Errol hears about this and present day defends himself by saying that the bully, quote, had just lost his father to suicide and Elon had called him stupid. Elon had a tendency to call people stupid. How could I possibly blame that child?
I see.
I mean, okay, maybe there's something there, but they put him in the hospital?
I see. So it's an interesting realization of the normal filters that quote unquote normal humans would see, because I could see that playing out differently with a more normal father, right? After the horrific hospital experience and after recovery and stuff, the father's thinking, okay, how can I teach my son to understand that you got to be careful in life when you're insulting people and blah blah and all these things. Instead, I'm gonna berate my nearly dead child. So it's like, it's so fascinating. And one of the things is like when you hear that bit of information, well, actually this paints a very interesting picture, right? Because we're hearing Elon Musk say, I think I maybe bumped into him. We're hearing his father say like you insulted him or whatever, and he had just lost his father. Well, it's quite possible that by this point, Elon had been abused enough by his father and also by the society and stuff to where he is callous about this kid's thing. The kid himself is probably abused and or going through terrible things, and his friends are all probably equally damaged. And so the whole thing is a mess. And the dad, instead of having the skills or tools to try to repair that, triples down on the damage.
Yeah. You could argue that follow-up from the father was more damaging than having gone through the beating. And people who have gone through that kind of verbal abuse will say that I would rather get beaten than being gaslit into believing that I'm a piece of shit for causing, half a dozen guys to try to kill me in the hallway at school. The other thing to point out, the irony here, is that the father is calling Elon stupid for calling another kid stupid.
Yeah. Where did you learn that?
You stupid idiot. You called him you stupid idiot. Like,
so wait a minute. When something terrible had just happened to that kid, you berated him and called him stupid? How can you be so stupid, you stupid?
yeah. And then you see Elon's behavior online and you think, well, the chain is alive.
Yeah.
So for 4 more years, Elon was reportedly relentlessly hounded by these same bullies. The bullies even, I'm wondering if there was a report that the boys had done it and they got in trouble, kind of.
Yeah.
And then the bullies just, doubled down. I don't know. The bullies even beat up a boy that Elon had considered a friend to get that friend to stop hanging out with Elon. The bullies used this former friend later on to lure Elon out of hiding. So there's a lot of details here, but what Elon will say, and I believe this, that he went to school with the primary goal of just trying to survive without being beaten by these bullies. And so he would hide on campus. And the bullies, in a Machiavelli, it's one thing to run into Elon in the hallway and go like, oh, there's that kid. No, they're like, we're noticing that there's a new friendship happening, which is kind of rare for Elon, right? And the bullies like get that guy and they beat him up and say, we're going to, beat you up even further if you continue being friends with that guy. And the kid's like, okay, and like distances himself from Elon. Then the bullies are like, oh, well, we can use this guy. So they go to the guy again and say, okay, we want you to approach Elon and draw him out of hiding, and then we're going to pounce on Elon and beat the shit out of him. I mean, my fucking God, right?
Damaged people damaging damaged people.
And then undoubtedly, the parents know, right? He went to the hospital.
Yeah.
They're alerted at the very least. What the fuck?
Yeah.
So,
but the whole system, the whole environment is completely toxic, right? Like you say, the parents. It sounds like the one kid doesn't even have a dad at this point because he died, right? If we believe the thing.
Yeah.
So it's all a mess, anyways. They all live in the same violent hellhole. They might have even been older than him. Who knows? But whatever. It's horrible.
And no one is there to help you.
Oh my God.
Not a teacher, not a parent,
Oh my God.
not a police officer, not a principal, nobody.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So Elon, in Ashley Vance's biography, I was reading it, and about this event of drawing convincing the new friend to draw Elon out. Elon said, "They got my best fucking friend to lure me out of hiding so they could beat me up. And that fucking hurt," meaning emotionally.
Yeah,
hurt.
of course.
And Ashley Vance says, while telling that part of the story, Musk's eyes welled up and his voice quivered. I mean, it makes me cry thinking about it. To think about getting beat up, it's the emotional side of it. It's one thing for bullies to be like, fuck you. And it's another thing that they convince a new friend that you're okay, I finally have an ally, just someone to talk
Forming
to.
attachments. Oh, I can't trust anyone.
And I've always struggled with making friends. Elon Musk might have been like, well, at least I have a new friendship with this guy, and he's going to school and he's like, I can't wait to see so and so. And then that guy comes, hey, how's it going, Elon? And come over here. And he's like, oh, here's my friend.
Yeah.
And gets lured out. And then just imagine the emotional damage that does. Yeah. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
Like I can't trust anybody. Yeah. So the key takeaway again, capital U, unsafe, constant threat, constant terror, community, school, peers, friends, home, dad, neighbors,
yeah,
different political factions, and no one, and I mean nobody, is there to help you. You're just you're in a war zone. You're in your own personal war zone, and there's no one is going to help you. You're just on your own. And the lesson you learn is people they want to hurt you, and they're going to hurt you, and no one cares that you're getting hurt. Nobody cares. Imagine going into the hospital and you go back to school and it's happening all over again. He didn't go back to the hospital again, but you could imagine a young Elon figuring, I'm going to get back. They're going to kill me.
Yeah.
And no one's doing anything. I mean, maybe the mom tried to do, I don't know, but clearly it was not effective. Plus, they're rich. Take him out of the school.
Yeah.
Send him to a private something. There's options.
But clearly the dad blamed him anyways.
The dad doesn't give a shit. But the mom, she's being beat too. But who knows? But this is on a level. I mean, you hear about one of these and you think, my God, and it's usually not this bad.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had clients where bullying was the only trauma they've been through. This is high level trauma, just constant, no friends, struggle socially. Just imagine what this does to your self-esteem, to your sense of safety in the world, to your nervous system, literally, your developing nervous system. It's going to do a number. Next, I want to talk about how all this relates to what I believe to be the pivotal year of Elon's turn, 2018. We already talked about the settlement that he paid out for the alleged sexual assault or harassment that he did with the SpaceX employee with the massage. But also this year was the Thailand kids incident. And this is when we go through step by step, date by date, and everything that happened. The headline I took a particular way, but when you go through all the data, it all makes sense to me how this went down. But first, let's take a break. And the rest of this episode will just be for patrons of the podcast. So if you want to hear this, become a patron. Otherwise, please, truly take care of yourself because
you deserve it.